There is a bird sitting in a tree right now that may have been alive before your grandparents were born. It has watched decades pass. It has outlived dogs, cats, entire human families. It remembers voices. It remembers faces. And if you walked past it today, you might not even stop to look twice. This is not a myth. This is not an exaggeration pulled from folklore or legend. This is a biological reality that scientists have spent decades trying to fully understand. And it is happening inside one of the most colorful, most vocal, most emotionally complex creatures on the planet. The macaw. You have seen them in zoos. You have seen them on calendars and screensavers, perched against a backdrop of green jungle, their feathers so vivid they almost look painted. But here is what most people never think about when they look at a macaw. That bird may be older than you. That bird may be older than your parents. And in some documented cases, that bird has lived long enough to see 4 generations of a human family grow up, grow old, and disappear, while the macaw remained, still bright, still loud, still watching. Before we go any deeper into this, if you love discovering the hidden side of the natural world, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below telling me if you have ever seen a macaw up close, or if you have ever kept one, because what you are about to learn will completely change how you see these birds. And make sure you subscribe, because this channel is the place where nature stops being background noise and starts being something extraordinary. Here is what this video is going to reveal. We are going to explore the biological mystery behind the macaw's extraordinary lifespan, what actually happens inside their bodies that allows them to survive so long, how their intelligence is directly tied to their longevity, and what their emotional lives look like across the span of decades. And stay until the end, because the final detail about what macaws do when the ones they love disappear is something that will stay with you long after this video ends. Let's begin at the beginning. Not at the beginning of a macaw's life, but at the beginning of the question that scientists kept asking themselves. Why do some birds live so long? For most of the animal kingdom, size and lifespan tend to track together. Larger animals tend to live longer. Elephants outlive mice. Whales outlive rabbits. The logic is simple enough that most people accept it without thinking too hard about it. But then along came the birds, and the whole framework started to fall apart. Birds, as a category, live dramatically longer than mammals of the same body size. A mouse and a sparrow weigh about the same. The mouse lives 2 or 3 years. The sparrow, in the right conditions, can live over a decade. Something about being a bird slows down the biological clock in ways that researchers are still actively studying. And among birds, the macaw sits at the far extreme of that spectrum. A large macaw species, like the Hyacinth Macaw or the Blue-and-Gold Macaw or the Scarlet Macaw, can live between 60 and 80 years in captivity under good care. Some individuals have been documented living past 100 years, though those cases are harder to verify with certainty. In the wild, lifespans are naturally shorter due to predation, disease, and habitat pressure, but even in the wild, a macaw that survives its early years can realistically live 30 to 50 years or more. That is not a bird. That is a lifetime companion. Think about what that number actually means in human terms. If a blue-and-gold macaw hatched the year you were born, and you are in your 30s, that bird is still in the early middle portion of its potential lifespan. It might comfortably outlive you. If a macaw was gifted to a family in the 1960s, that bird may still be alive today, having watched children become grandparents. This is not hypothetical. There are documented cases of macaws being passed down through wills, inherited like heirlooms, moving from one human generation to the next as the bird itself continued on, unchanged in its essential personality, in its voice, in its memories. But here is where it gets strange. The macaw's longevity is not simply a matter of being lucky or well-fed. Something is happening at the cellular level that scientists find genuinely remarkable. One of the key mechanisms that researchers have focused on is the biology of aging itself. In most animals, every time a cell divides, the protective caps at the end of chromosomes, called telomeres, get slightly shorter. Think of them like the plastic tips on the ends of a shoelace. Each time the shoelace is used, the tip wears down a little. When it is gone completely, the shoelace starts to fray. When telomeres wear down completely, cells stop dividing properly, and the body begins to deteriorate. This is a core driver of aging in mammals. In many long-lived bird species, including macaws, researchers have found that the rate of telomere shortening is significantly slower than in short-lived mammals of comparable size. Studies looking at parrot family members, which includes macaws, have suggested that these birds have evolved mechanisms that protect their chromosomes during cell division in ways that simply do not exist in most other vertebrates. The cells wear down more slowly. The body follows. This is not magic. This is millions of years of evolution selecting for animals that could survive long enough to reproduce across multiple seasons, raise complex young that require years of learning, and maintain sophisticated social bonds that take decades to build. Nature did not give the macaw long life out of generosity. It gave it a long life because a long life was exactly what the macaw needed to function. And that brings us to the second piece of the puzzle: intelligence. Macaws are not simply colorful decorations in the jungle canopy. They are among the most cognitively complex birds on the planet, and their intelligence is deeply connected to their lifespan in ways that create a kind of feedback loop. The longer they live, the more they can learn. The more they can learn, the better they survive. The better they survive, the longer they live. Wild macaws live in complex social groups where relationships matter enormously. They form pair bonds that last for life, and when we say for life, we mean exactly that. A mated pair of macaws does not simply share a nest. They fly together, forage together, groom each other, communicate in ways that researchers believe are partially individualized, meaning that two macaws that have been together for 20 years have developed a shared language, a set of calls and responses that is specific to them as a pair. Ornithologists studying macaw populations in South America have observed that paired individuals recognize each other's calls from remarkable distances, and will change their flight path to reunite when separated. What most people never realize is that this kind of bonding requires memory that spans years and decades. A macaw does not reset its social understanding every season the way a shorter-lived animal might. It carries its history with it. It remembers. And that memory is not just social. It is navigational, ecological, and environmental. Macaws in the wild know their territory in extraordinary detail. They know which trees produce fruit at which time of year. They know the location of clay licks, those mineral-rich riverbank walls where macaws gather in spectacular numbers to eat clay that neutralizes toxins in the seeds they consume. They know which routes are dangerous, which areas hold predators, which parts of the forest have changed due to drought or human activity. That knowledge is not instinct. It is accumulated experience, built up over years and decades of paying attention to the world around them. A young macaw learns from older ones. Not just from its parents, but from the flock. Older birds carry ecological knowledge that younger ones cannot yet have, and in a habitat that changes with floods, droughts, and seasons, that knowledge is not trivial. It is the difference between finding food and going without. Between knowing which path is safe and flying straight into a predator's range. This is survival encoded in memory, and it requires a long life to build. But here is the part that changes everything when you really sit with it. Macaws do not just remember places and food sources. They remember individuals. They remember relationships. And they experience the loss of those relationships in ways that are difficult to interpret as anything other than grief. There are documented accounts from bird sanctuaries and long-term keepers of macaws that describe individual birds becoming visibly withdrawn, less vocal, less active, and less interested in food following the death of a long-term companion. Pairs that had been bonded for decades showed signs of distress after separation that could last for months. Some never fully recovered their previous social engagement. Researchers are careful about applying human emotional frameworks to animal behavior, and rightly so. But field observations suggest that macaws have an emotional investment in their social bonds that goes far beyond simple habit or proximity preference. This is not random. This is a byproduct of building a life across 6 or 7 decades. When you have spent 30 years flying beside the same bird, sleeping beside the same bird, navigating the same forest beside the same bird, that relationship becomes woven into the architecture of your existence. Its absence is not just a social change, it is a structural loss. And this raises something that most people who admire macaws never consider. A macaw in captivity, or a macaw that loses its wild habitat, is not simply losing its home. It is losing the decades of accumulated relationships and knowledge that its long life was specifically designed to build and maintain. A parrot removed from a complex social environment and placed in isolation is not just bored. It is cognitively and emotionally deprived in ways that correspond to the depth of its social intelligence. This is why isolated parrots develop repetitive behaviors, why they pluck their feathers, why they call endlessly into empty rooms. They are not acting strangely. They are doing what a highly intelligent, long-lived social creature does when the social architecture it was built for simply does not exist around it. There is also something deeply humbling about the macaw's relationship with time when you consider the ecosystem it evolved within. The Amazon rainforest, where many macaw species are native, is itself one of the oldest ecosystems on Earth. Trees in that forest can live for centuries. Some fruit cycles span years. The ecological relationships between plants, animals, fungi, and insects are so intricate and so old that an animal navigating that system successfully needs time to understand it. The macaw's longevity may have evolved partly as a response to the complexity of its environment. A short-lived animal living in a straightforward habitat can get by on instinct and a few seasons of learned behavior. A macaw living in one of the most complex biological systems on the planet needs something more. It needs decades of reading that system, season by season, flood by flood, year by year. This is also why macaw populations are so slow to recover when they are disturbed. These are not animals that reproduce quickly and replace their numbers within a few seasons. A macaw pair typically raises 1 or 2 chicks per year, and those chicks require years of parental investment before they are truly independent. A macaw does not reach full sexual maturity until somewhere between 3 and 5 years of age, depending on the species. The slow reproduction is the other side of the longevity coin. Long life, slow reproduction. And when that long life is cut short by habitat destruction, poaching, or the illegal pet trade, the population does not bounce back easily. The knowledge that older birds carry disappears with them. The relationships break. And the slow, careful math of macaw survival gets disrupted in ways that take generations to correct. The threat to macaws is real and ongoing. The Spix's macaw, that vivid blue species that inspired the film about a small blue bird searching for his kind, is functionally extinct in the wild. Several subspecies of macaw exist today in numbers so small that researchers track individual birds by name. The Hyacinth Macaw, the largest flying parrot in the world, with feathers the color of a deep tropical sky and a wingspan that can stretch past a meter, has seen its wild population reduced to somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 individuals. An animal that can live longer than most humans, reduced to a population smaller than many neighborhoods. That detail matters more than it seems. Because when we talk about losing a macaw species, we are not just talking about losing a type of bird. We are talking about losing 80 years of potential life per individual. We are talking about losing the accumulated ecological knowledge that those individuals would have passed on to their young. We are talking about losing social structures that took decades to form. The extinction of a long-lived species carries a weight that numbers alone cannot capture. And yet, in the places where macaws still thrive, where the forest is intact and the clay licks still draw hundreds of birds on a single morning, the sight of them is something that stops people completely. There are accounts from researchers arriving at a major macaw clay lick for the first time, having studied birds their entire academic careers, who simply went quiet. Because what you see when hundreds of scarlet and blue-and-gold macaws descend on a riverbank, screaming and wheeling in the morning light, feathers catching every angle of color, is something that bypasses thought entirely and goes straight to something older and quieter inside you. These birds have been doing this for longer than human civilization has existed. They were here before the cities. They will be here, if we choose wisely, long after the buildings we consider permanent have crumbled back into the ground. A macaw alive today may have been born before the first smartphones, before the internet, before satellites. It has watched the world change around it in ways that would have seemed impossible to predict, and it has kept flying, kept calling, kept finding its way back to its partner at the end of each day. That is not just biology. That is something worth slowing down for. So the next time you see a macaw, whether through glass in a zoo, or in a photograph from the Amazon, or perhaps sitting near you in a home where it has lived for decades already, do not look at it like a beautiful bird with bright feathers. Look at it like what it actually is: a living archive. A creature built by evolution for a long, complex, emotionally rich life in one of the most intricate ecosystems on Earth. A being with memory that reaches back further than yours, with bonds that lasted longer than most human friendships, and with a relationship to time that most of us will never fully understand. The macaw does not know it is extraordinary. It is simply living the life it was made for. And maybe that is the most extraordinary thing of all. Tell me in the comments, have you ever spent real time with a macaw, or known someone who had one for decades? I want to hear those stories. The long ones, the strange ones, the ones where the bird clearly remembered something it should not have been able to. I read every single comment. I will see you in the next one.